Hey guys, tonight we start with a story you think you know, but trust me, you don't know it like this. Picture this. Endless twilight, stone underfoot and in your hands. A boulder that's way too big to be anyone's problem, but somehow it's yours, forever. You're in Tartarus, the underworld's worst Airbnb, and you're Sisyphus, condemned to push a rock uphill for all eternity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how far this sleepy little universe stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins, as these things often do, with a man who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. And maybe he is. You're Sisyphus, king of Ephyra, modern-day Corinth if you're trying to pin it on a map. And you're not just a ruler, you're a schemer. You make shady deals with gods, rat out Zeus to a river god, chain up death itself, and somehow think no one's going to call you on it. Spoiler, they do. But let's rewind. First of all, you don't die like a normal person. You trick Thanatos, the god of death, into putting himself in chains. For a while, no one dies. Soldiers keep fighting. People walk off cliffs and just sort of bounce. It's chaos, and it's kind of hilarious. But Zeus isn't laughing. Eventually Ares, the god of war who's really more into biceps than brains, comes in and frees Thanatos. You're caught. Still, not done scheming, you tell your wife not to perform the usual burial rites. Then, when you're dragged to the underworld, you put on your best wide-eyed face and say, "Oh no, my wife didn't even bury me. Please let me go back and scold her." And weirdly, they let you. You pop back into the world of the living and, in a move that's honestly pretty on brand, decide never to return. You're alive. You win. Or so you think. Eventually the gods tire of your shenanigans. Hermes, the divine errand boy with winged sandals and zero patience, drags you back down personally. No more tricks. No more loopholes. You're sentenced not just to die, but to work. Forever. Tartarus is no garden. It's the bleak basement of the underworld, reserved for the worst offenders like you. And your job? Push a rock uphill. When it reaches the top, it rolls back down. Lather, rinse, repeat. Forever. Now here's the thing about Greek punishments, they're tailor-made. You weren't given a boring eternity in silence or some cozy endless nap. You were given a task that echoes everything you ever were. You wanted control, strategy, manipulation. Congratulations. You get all of it, channeled into an object that does not care about you. Historically, Sisyphus shows up in a few sources. Homer mentions him as someone of cunning mind, and the poet Pindar calls him the craftiest of men. That's ancient Greek for, this guy cannot be trusted with even a mildly enchanted fork. Over time, Sisyphus became a symbol not just of punishment, but of persistence and futility. But here's a little-known tidbit. Some scholars believe Sisyphus may not have been purely mythical. There's a theory that he was based on a real local ruler in ancient Corinth, who gained a reputation for outwitting neighbouring cities and using clever politics to strengthen his rule. If true, you might have been just a guy who played the game too well, and the gods, as always, hated that. Still, historians argue whether Sisyphus' story was always meant to be a moral lesson, or whether it evolved as a kind of cosmic inside joke among the Greeks. Because the gods in these stories aren't all-knowing. They're messy, egotistical, and surprisingly petty. Think of them more like a group chat of overpowered narcissists, occasionally deciding your fate between rounds of ambrosia. So here you are now. You look at the boulder, and it looks back at you, in that indifferent rocky way. You're in a canyon of shadows, with stone walls stretching infinitely upward. There's a slope, a cruel, slick hill with no top you can ever quite reach. And the rock waits at the bottom. No one gives you instructions. No one checks in. You just start pushing. Because what else is there? Your hands scrape, your knees wobble, and every single inch you move it feels like trying to budge a stubborn couch up a staircase. Except the couch is made of regret and weighs like a god's bad mood. At some point the rock slips, and with a mocking groan it tumbles back to the bottom. You chase it, maybe muttering things under your breath that even Hades would find too passive-aggressive. You start over, and over, and over. You don't know what day it is. The underworld doesn't do clocks. Time here is a slow, syrupy fog, and you're a bug caught inside it, legs wiggling, eyes rolling. But, and here's the twist, you don't give up. Because giving up would mean surrendering your agency, and you, dear Sisyphus, are nothing if not stubborn. You start to notice patterns. The rock catches on a certain ledge every time. The slope curves just slightly at one point. Your muscles memorize the rhythm, and eventually it's not that you're happy, but you're not surprised anymore. You learn to brace for the rollback. You adjust your grip. You think, maybe next time, just maybe, you'll get half an inch farther, and that, right there, is the slow magic of it. The punishment starts to become, not less, but something different. This is how it begins. The first push-up hill is the worst, obviously, not because it's heavier than expected, though it absolutely is, but because the rock doesn't feel like it belongs to you yet. It's just a punishment, a random boulder, some weird divine prop that you've been saddled with like the world's most aggressive gym trainer. But here's the thing about punishment. Over time, it becomes routine. Your hands don't blister anymore. Your back still aches, but now in that familiar low-level kind of way, like background music you've stopped noticing. Every push feels a little less confusing, a little more like a job you didn't apply for but also can't get fired from. You trudge behind the boulder, digging your heels into the slope. There's no applause, no audience, just that same grey stretch of underworld terrain, and the sound of stone scraping against stone, which is, let's be honest, not the most soothing ASMR. At first, you make deals with yourself. If I reach that tiny crack in the wall, I'll rest for a breath. Then, if I push for another 20 steps without collapsing, I'll allow one dramatic groan. You invent goals, milestones, rock-based personal growth metrics, and slowly, annoyingly slowly, you get a feel for the rhythm. It's not like you enjoy it. Not yet. But something changes. Maybe it's just the absence of surprise. At some point, the agony of uncertainty fades, and a strange, almost mechanical comfort takes its place. You know what's coming. You know the slope will resist. You know the boulder will roll back. But while the punishment stays the same, you are changing. Let's slip in a little historical seasoning, shall we? Ancient Greeks were really into the idea of fate. Moira, they called it. Everyone had their thread spun by the fates, and trying to cut or dodge your thread never ended well. Sisyphus's story is, in many ways, the ultimate cautionary tale about refusing to accept one's place in the cosmic spreadsheet. But here's the twist. Philosophers much later, hello, Albert Camus, flipped that idea. Camus famously said we should imagine Sisyphus happy, which is either deeply inspiring or deeply suspicious depending on how much sleep you've had. He argued that once you accept the absurdity of your task, you become free, and you're starting to feel that in your calves, your mind wanders, you count each push like a chant, the numbers meaning less than the cadence. The rock becomes a kind of metronome, sinking your thoughts into quiet, controlled loops, and weirdly, it starts to feel better than standing still. Resting makes the silence louder, but pushing at least gives you a direction. Forward, up. Now here's a quirky tidbit for you. In one early myth variant, Sisyphus wasn't just punished for trickery, he was accused of violating xenia, the sacred Greek rule of hospitality. Supposedly, he killed travellers to boost his city's economy, which, yes, is terrible tourism policy. Whether that's fact or just posthumous PR spin remains a mystery. But it paints you, our sleepless stone roller, as someone who tried to take control where you shouldn't. And the gods? They hate a control freak, so they gave you a problem you can never solve. But the human mind, well, even in eternal damnation it adapts. You start to experiment. Push with your shoulder instead of your hands. Adjust your foot placement. Whisper insults at the rock to see if it rolls faster out of spite. It doesn't, but it's fun to try. At some point you realise something almost offensive in its simplicity. There's no rush. The rock's not going anywhere. There's no bell, no end of shift whistle. And the hill? The hill waits. You push because you push. The pointlessness stops bothering you, not because you've solved it, but because it no longer matters. Now don't get it twisted, you're still trapped, still sweaty, still looking like a rejected CrossFit class mascot. But your focus narrows, there's less noise in your brain, less second guessing, it's almost peaceful. Almost. Historians still argue whether the Sisyphus myth was originally meant to be tragic or comic. Some say it reflected the Greek sense of irony, how even cleverness couldn't outwit divine order. Others believe it was more of a cosmic roast. Look what happens when you try to game the system, buddy. But there's a third view, a quieter, lonelier one. That Sisyphus isn't being mocked or punished in the loud, vengeful sense. Maybe he's being given time. Not freedom, but reflection. The kind of stripped-down silence where your thoughts echo like footsteps in an empty cave. That's the unsettling part. After a while, you stop wanting to escape, not because you've given up, but because the escape wouldn't make sense anymore. The rock becomes your clock, your rhythm, your weirdly judgmental co-worker. You push, it rolls. You chase it, it waits. That's the game. That's your life. So you grip the stone, plant your feet, and push again. You lean into it not with fury, but with curiosity. Each slip is a data point. Each success, a fraction of a second longer than the last. The slope becomes your puzzle. You're no longer fighting it, you're studying it. That's when it starts to get dangerous. Not because anything changes, but because you do. You catch yourself humming. You give the boulder nicknames. Rocky, Grindelstein, Captain Nope. You start narrating its journey in dramatic tones like some tragic sports announcer. Anything to pass the time. And weirdly, it helps. The absurdity becomes your shield. The repetition, your lullaby. At some point, the rock slips again, as always. It groans and growls and plummets down the slope, mocking all your efforts. You sigh, wipe your face, watch it settle at the bottom with that familiar dumb sense of finality. And then you smile, just a little, because this time the push wasn't quite so hard. So here's the part where you start noticing how truly weird myths are. And not weird in a fun, quirky, talking animals and magic fountains kind of way. No, Greek myths are weird in the wait, what did he turn into and why is she talking to a goose kind of way. Take a moment between your boulder shoves. Let your sweaty hands hang loose. Now, as you lean against your rock like a very muscular towel rack, you begin to wonder, is this really the worst punishment the gods have handed out? Oh, sweet listener, not even close. Let's take a stroll through some divine inconsistency, shall we? Tantalus, for instance. He fed his own son to the gods at a dinner party. Poor taste, literally and figuratively. The punishment? He's now eternally thirsty and hungry, with food and water always just out of reach. A bit like trying to start a diet in a bakery. But then there's someone like Theseus, who literally ditched a woman on an island after promising eternal love and faced nothing. Nada. Not even a divine scolding. Makes your endless rock reps feel oddly proportional, doesn't it? Greek myths don't run on justice. They run on drama and very selective karma. That's why your punishment is more poetic than fair. You challenge the gods, expose Zeus's creepy behaviour, and try to cheat death. Bold moves. But in a mythos full of shape-shifting kidnappers and serial curse-flingers, you almost come off as reasonable. There's actually a scholarly debate about this. Was Sisyphus a moral lesson or a narrative placeholder? Some ancient writers used him as an example of hubris, excessive pride, the cardinal Greek sin, but others seem to just enjoy the absurdity, like a cosmic meme with very slow punchlines, a quirky historical tidbit. There's a fringe theory that Sisyphus' story was originally part of an Orphic ritual myth, those secretive, mystical cults that thought the soul had to undergo purification through suffering. So maybe this isn't punishment, maybe it's cleansing, a celestial crossfit of the spirit. Too bad you didn't sign up for that gym. Either way, you're starting to get it. Greek mythology isn't a system, it's more like a mood board, a divine Pinterest of chaos. The gods don't deal out fair punishments, they deal out stories. Ones people will remember, ones that say, don't do what he did, but in a way that's oddly entertaining. So you push, you sweat, you squint up the hill, wondering how far is left, though you know it doesn't matter. The goal isn't the top, it's the motion. You remember that guy from earlier, Ixion. You ran into him once on the edge of the Tartarus slope, spinning endlessly on a fiery wheel for trying to seduce Hera. Bold move, dumb move. You nodded at each other. There's a quiet camaraderie among the damned. And if Ixion's wheel is absurd, what's your rock? A metaphor? A punishment? A prop in a mythological sitcom that never got cancelled? You wipe your brow. The underworld air is dry, like an eternal sauna without the eucalyptus oil. The walls of the canyon never change, jagged, volcanic, with glowing veins of red running through them like mood lighting from hell's least enthusiastic interior designer. Every so often a breeze comes. Not cool, not refreshing, just movement. Just enough to remind you that time hasn't stopped, even if progress has. Sometimes, while pushing, your mind drifts to the gods. What are they doing? Are they watching you? Laughing? Bored? The Greek pantheon was a full-time circus. Zeus chasing mortals, Hera sabotaging mistresses, Poseidon being emotionally unavailable in aquatic ways. Maybe they check in now and then, a divine side-eye from Olympus. Or maybe not. Maybe this punishment isn't for their amusement at all. Maybe it's for yours. Don't roll your eyes. Think about it. What if this whole thing is about giving you time to realise something no living king could? That all your plotting, your cleverness, your escape plans, they were distractions. They kept your brain buzzing but never still. And now, with only a rock, a hill, and your breath, you finally hear what silence sounds like. That's scarier than any god. So you start asking different questions. Not, how do I get out of this, but how do I exist in this? You start testing not just the rock, but your own limits. How long can you push without thinking? How much weight can your back take before the pain turns into background static? You realise something that makes you pause, hands resting on the rough, cool curve of your boulder. The myth isn't weird because it's cruel. It's weird because it's familiar. Every mortal has their version of this. The early wake-ups, the work that never finishes, the dreams that never quite become real, and yet you all keep pushing. Because stopping would mean looking too closely at the why, and not everyone wants to do that. Sisyphus in that way isn't some ancient outlier. He's just honest. Brutally, sleepily honest. He's what it looks like when someone has no more distractions. So yeah, myths are weird. But maybe that's the point. They're not supposed to make sense. They're supposed to whisper in the back of your sleepy mind. You're not alone in the absurd. The rock slips. Down it goes. You sigh. Not with anger, not anymore, but with recognition. You trudge down after it, legs moving on autopilot, like someone returning to their desk after lunch. The task is waiting. The day is eternal. And somehow, you're still here. You place your hands back on the stone. It's warm now. Familiar. A weird kind of company. Like a terrible roommate you've grown to tolerate. You dig your feet into the slope, and you push again. The rock is still your enemy. But lately, it's also starting to feel like something else. A companion? No, that's too generous. Let's say a frenemy. The kind you wouldn't invite to dinner, but if they vanished, you'd sort of miss the chaos they brought to your life. You run your palm over its surface again. It's jagged, sure, but now you know the grooves. That one notch on the left side catches your hip every third shove. The smooth down spot on top, your go-to handhold when the hill gets slick. You've mapped it out, and in some strange underworld IKEA catalogue way, the rock feels designed for you. You lean against it for a second. Not out of exhaustion, though, okay, yes, also that, but out of something resembling fondness, or at least familiarity. The kind you develop with any object you spend way too much time with. Think, your favourite mug, your weirdly loyal stapler, or that one creaky chair in the corner you never throw away. Let's not pretend this is love, but it is a relationship, which raises a strange question. What would you even do without it? You glance at the slope, the skyless void above, the way the canyon hums with quiet menace. You imagine the rock just not being there. It's a disorienting thought, like waking up and finding your house gone, replaced with a field of unspoken expectations. Sure, the punishment was supposed to break you, but instead it built a routine. And the boulder, it's become a fixture, something to push against, something to hold on to. Historically, humans have done this a lot, personifying inanimate objects to make sense of the world. Ancient sailors named their ships. Blacksmiths gave their hammers pet names. Even in Greek antiquity, tools and weapons were often seen as loyal companions. Achilles had a shield with its own fan club. So you naming the rock isn't weird, it's human. You try out a few, Chunk Norris, Dwayne the Rock, Sir Rolls-a-Lot. None stick. Eventually you settle on calling it the boulder. Simple, serious, a little dramatic. It feels right. The boulder never responds, of course, but after enough time you start imagining expressions in its blank face. Judgment, sass, even resignation. You mutter to it as you work, not because it answers, but because the silence gets too heavy otherwise. Here's a fringe theory that scholars rarely mention. Some believe the myth of Sisyphus isn't about punishment at all. It's about companionship. A cautionary tale not about hubris, but about what happens when you end up with the one partner you can never leave. Yourself, and by extension, whatever burdens you've chosen to carry. The boulder is you, and also not. It's the shadow of every decision that brought you here, rolled up into one unwieldy granite metaphor. You push it not because you must, but because it reflects something you don't want to drop. That hits a little harder when you realise you've stopped fighting it. You still grunt, still sweat, still let out the occasional dramatic sigh for no one's benefit but your own. But you no longer curse the gods or beg for release. The rebellion is gone, in its place. A sort of curious detachment, a grim kind of peace. And here's the really unsettling part. That makes you more dangerous. See, the gods designed this as a punishment, but you're turning it into a process, a routine, a weird soul gym ritual. You've outlasted their intention, which is kind of amazing. In fact, historians still argue whether this myth was meant to portray ultimate despair, or whether it's actually a weird form of spiritual evolution. Is acceptance surrender, or strength? You don't know. But as you press your shoulder into the boulder and push again, you're starting to suspect it's both, and neither. Today, if today even means anything here, you try something new. You angle your steps differently. Push with your legs more than your back. The boulder shifts, not much, but enough to remind you that even in repetition, there's room for variation. You smile, just a little, not because it gets easier, but because you notice yourself getting better. Now, before you start romanticising the whole thing, let's be clear. This is still eternal punishment. You'd still trade it in a heartbeat for a day at the beach, or even a long nap and a mediocre sandwich. But since the trade's not on the table, you make what you can of it. That's kind of the human thing, isn't it? Turning a cage into a rhythm, making art out of agony, finding moments of levity, even when the punchline is a boulder that never ever learns to stay put. You reach the midpoint of the slope again, where the incline gets mean. You feel it in your ankles first, tightening, bracing, then your shoulders, then your jaw, clenching slightly as the weight shifts. The boulder does what it always does, wobbles, slips, pretends to behave. Then, with perfect frustrating timing, it rolls backward. You don't chase it, not right away. You watch it for a few seconds as it gathers speed and crashes down to its designated start here spot. When it finally settles, you begin the walk back, slowly. No rush. The climb is inevitable. On your way down, you think about the boulder, about how many times you've touched it, cursed it, leaned on it. You think about the odd, hollow panic that bubbled up earlier at the thought of it not being there. You don't love it. Let's not get poetic. But it's yours. And somehow, that matters. The gods may have given you the punishment, but you gave it meaning. And so, once again, you find your place behind it. Hands set, breath steady, and you push. You'd think that eternity would at least come with a break room, a shady corner, maybe a rickety stool, but no. Tartarus doesn't do ergonomic design. Still, everyone needs a moment sometimes. Even you, the famously tireless rock pusher. So you invent them. You stop mid-hill, panting lightly, hands on your knees, not because the gods allow it, but because what are they going to do? Give you another eternity? This is your version of a lunch break. It's not glamorous. There's no sandwich, no coffee, not even lukewarm ambrosia. Just the taste of grit in your mouth and the metallic scent of your own sweat. You stare out across the cracked, smoky landscape and imagine what a Tartarus snack bar might look like. Maybe a little rock counter with magma tea. Maybe Sisyphus-branded granola bars. Now with 100% despair. You chuckle at your own joke. That's a new development. Finding yourself funny. Solitude does that. You become your own audience, your own heckler, your own weatherman, forecasting eternal uphill gusts and a 100% chance of existential dread. But honestly, it's not as dramatic as it sounds. Once the first few thousand years pass, the panic wears off. Your body, well, whatever counts as a body down here, stops craving change. It starts craving rhythm. And if that rhythm includes you lying on a sunless rock ledge for 5 minutes pretending you're on break, so be it. Here's a historical snack for your brain. The ancient Greeks were masters of ritual. Daily routines weren't just habits. They were sacred. Morning offerings, structured meals, communal prayers. Life had beats, like a divine drumline. In that sense, what you're doing isn't far off. You're just a one-man ritual, a walking, sweating, grunting prayer to repetition itself. And honestly, there's something grounding about that. A fringe detail most don't know. Tartarus wasn't just a place of punishment. In earlier versions of myth, before the whole eternal torment brand took off, it was seen as a kind of deep earth womb, a holding space, not good or bad, just other. Some even thought it was the true origin point of everything, the first darkness before light, the basement of existence. So maybe this isn't just about paying for your crimes. Maybe it's about undoing something in the core of you, something stubborn, sharp-edged, like sanding down a soul with every step you take. You lean back against the boulder. It doesn't roll. For once, it's perfectly balanced, a quiet slab of patient judgment. You don't speak to it this time. You just breathe. That's the trick no one tells you about eternity. It's not the action that gets to you. It's the space between the actions, the silent moments when your mind drifts and you remember things, like the smell of Corinthian sea salt, or the sound of palace sandals scraping polished stone, or that one time you outwitted death and thought, wow, I'm unbeatable. You were wrong, of course. But that's not the part you dwell on. You dwell on the feeling, that short-lived, intoxicating sense of power. No one tells you how addictive it is, feeling like you've won against the rules. But now, stripped of everything, title, city, body, you're left with only motion and memory. And weirdly, it's enough. Historically, Sisyphus becomes more than a man over time. In the later philosophical traditions, especially Stoicism, he evolves into a symbol of choice. You can't control the rock. You can't make the hill shorter, but you can choose how you walk it. And today, you walk slowly, because it's your lunch break, and eternal punishment or not, you deserve that much. The quiet around you isn't oppressive anymore. It's gentle, like a thick blanket. The kind that muffles all the sharp edges of the world. The wind here carries no scent, just a dry hush, like a librarian softly shushing the cosmos. From your perch on the halfway ledge, you see other figures in the distance. Not close, not often, but there. Tantalus, of course, his hands always reaching. Ixion spinning endlessly like a bad idea on repeat. And farther off, someone you don't know. A shadow halfway up a tree that grows sideways. You don't wave. You've learned not to. There's an etiquette among the eternally punished. You don't interrupt each other's torment. It's like a library rule or an airport security line. Unspoken, universal, weirdly sacred. So you lie back against the boulder and think. You think about how in life you were always moving towards something. A throne, a scheme, an edge over fate. And now, you're still moving, but without destination. It should be maddening, and yet, it's not. You wonder if this is what monks feel like, or those old philosophers who wandered naked through the marketplace asking strangers impossible questions. There's something purifying about doing one thing again and again until the noise stops. Historians still argue whether your punishment was meant to reflect despair or hope. Some say the myth is about futility, others think it's about control. If you can find peace in a task that never ends, then maybe you've mastered something bigger than freedom. Maybe you've mastered yourself. You snort, then mutter aloud, deep thoughts for a guy with a boulder best friend. The boulder remains unmoved. Obviously, you stand, stretch, roll your shoulders, dust off your palms against your thighs, even though the dust just settles again immediately, like underworld glitter. You place your hands on the boulder's cool, stubborn surface. It doesn't flinch, doesn't react, but it's ready. And so are you, because even lunch breaks must end eventually. And the hill? The hill's not going anywhere, so you push. Again. You don't need to look up anymore to know how far there is to go. You feel it. In your spine, in your steps, in that one knee that creaks like an old temple door. The slope is always the same, but now it's memorized into your bones. You could climb it blindfolded, though let's not tempt the gods. They've got a sense of humour, and you don't need surprise snakes today. As you push, you start thinking about them again. The gods. Not just the flashy ones who made headlines with lightning bolts and questionable moral decisions, but the lesser-known ones too. The ones with boring jobs and unglamorous thrones. You know, the celestial office workers. You remember Zeus, of course. It's hard not to. Big beard, booming voice, an ego the size of Mount Olympus. But he wasn't exactly a paragon of moral clarity. More like the CEO who constantly breaks his own HR policies. Then there's Hades, god of the underworld, supposedly the brooding one, but in truth, he might be the most stable of the bunch. At least he's consistent. He doesn't meddle, doesn't thunder around. He just manages, like a weary librarian cataloguing everyone's mistakes. Hermes, though, that guy. He was the one who dragged you back here. Winged sandals, a smug expression, fast-talking delivery service of divine justice. You always imagined him as a glorified intern with god-level cardio. Annoyingly good posture, smelled like olive oil and sarcasm. Greek gods weren't all fire and glory. Most of them had side gigs. Artemis liked hunting, sure, but she also dabbled in wilderness conservation. Apollo moonlighted as a music teacher. Dionysus invented wine and somehow also existential crisis brunch. It's like each deity had their divine portfolio and their after-hours hobby. Here's your historical fact of the hour. The Greeks didn't worship their gods because they were moral. They worshipped them because they were powerful and familiar. The gods weren't better than humans. They were humans, just louder, shinier, and more prone to turning into swans. And the bureaucracy? Oh, it was real. There were minor gods for everything. Sleep, door hinges, regret. You half suspect there's a god of poorly designed hills, and they're particularly proud of the one you're climbing. The ancient poet Hesiod once tried to list all the gods. He gave up halfway through and just started naming feelings. Ponos for toil, Limos for famine, Algos for pain, which means even the emotions had deities. Somewhere out there, someone's praying to the god of awkward silences. And then there's you, Sisyphus. No altar, no offerings, no cult status. Just a guy with a boulder and a resume that says, Professional Rock Technician Eternity. You wonder sometimes if the gods ever check your progress. Maybe Zeus drops in occasionally, peering down like a middle manager peeking over a cubicle wall. Maybe Hades passes by with a clipboard, murmuring, Still rolling? Good, good. Or maybe, just maybe, they've forgotten you entirely. That thought hits different, because once upon a time, you were someone, a king, a trickster, a name whispered with admiration or dread, depending on the company. Now, you're a footnote in divine paperwork, a cosmic post-it stuck to the underside of reality, punishment in progress. Do not remove. There's a story, fringe, probably apocryphal, that during the early ages gods would sometimes bargain punishments among each other like trading cards. I'll take your cursed musician if you take my rock guy. If true, you might have been passed around like bad office gossip, an eternal middle manager's burden. It's weirdly comforting, not to be special, just to be part of something bigger, even if that something is divine micromanagement. Still, you get the sense that Tartarus isn't visited much anymore. Maybe the gods have moved on, new mortals to torment, new myths to update. Olympus always did like staying trendy. Historians still argue whether the Greek gods ever believed in punishment as justice, or if it was just spectacle, divine theatre, something to keep the mortals in line with stories like yours. See what happens if you get too clever? But if no one's watching anymore, what does that make you? You stop halfway up the hill, press your forehead to the rock. It's warm, radiating some deep volcanic heat. Not alive, but present, like a memory you can't shake. You whisper, they're not watching. The boulder doesn't care, it never has. And that, oddly, is freedom. Because if no one is watching, you're no longer performing. You're no longer being tested. You're just here, doing the thing, repeating the motion, rolling, chasing, returning. Not for them, not even for meaning, just because it's what you do. You hear a faint, distant crash. Tantalus, probably, knocking over something in frustration. The sounds of Tartarus are scattered, inconsistent. No birds, no wind, just occasional thuds, groans, muttered curses, and the eternal whisper of movement against resistance. Like life, but slower. You crouch at the base again, catching your breath. You place your hands on the boulder like an old friend, not because you love it, but because it's the only thing in this godforsaken underworld that hasn't changed. And you push, not for Olympus, not for redemption, not even to reach the top. You push because you're still here. Repetition has a rhythm. You never thought you'd say that without flinching, but here we are, mid-eternity, mid-slope, mid-boulder roll, and you're starting to feel the groove of it. You used to count the steps it took to reach the midpoint of the hill. Not because it mattered, it doesn't, but because counting felt like control. Step 1, step 2, step 338, where your left knee makes that subtle complaint. The counting eventually gave way to humming, then muttering, then silence. Now it's just breath and stone and motion. You used to dread the top. Now it's just another beat in the cycle. Push, roll, return. The hill's not changing. But you are. And not in the dramatic glow-up montage kind of way. More like water carving a groove into stone. Slow, imperceptible, but real. You're not losing yourself. You're uncovering it. Because after enough time, repetition stops being torture. It becomes practice. Maybe even something close to ritual, if you squint spiritually. Here's a historical fun fact. The Stoics, those toga-clad buzzkills of ancient Greece, believed that virtue wasn't some magical lightning bolt. It was habit, practice, doing the same right thing over and over until it became who you were. They might have liked your situation, honestly. They'd call it an opportunity to refine the soul, and then probably recommend a deeply bland diet. There's a fringe interpretation of your myth floating around, one that says your punishment is actually an act of mercy. That the gods, for all their chaos, gave you a task so simple, so singular, that it allowed your fragmented mind to come back together. Like giving a toddler a shape sorter and saying, "Figure this out forever." At first you scoffed. Now you're not so sure. Because repetition, while exhausting, also erases. It erases the anxiety of choice, the pressure of progress. You never have to decide what's next. The boulder always tells you, "Push me," and so you do. The hill, for all its spite, has become your arena. And the boulder, your opponent, coach, and therapy dog rolled into one. You start to notice the timing of your steps, the shift in balance when the slope steepens. You play with foot placement like a bored dancer learning new steps to an old song. Sometimes you try to trick the boulder, give it a false shove, make it think you're going left when you're actually going right. It doesn't care, obviously. It's a rock. But the game of it matters. It gives you something to play against, something to measure. You realise something. This is what you were good at in life too. Reframing reality to suit you, turning things into puzzles. Back in Corinth, you outwitted rivals, turned prophecy into opportunity, bent death itself into a short-term roommate. And now, you've turned eternal punishment into a training montage. The funny thing is, no one gets to see it. Maybe that's what makes it real. No applause, no gossiping gods, just you and the work. There's something wildly human about that. Doing something well for no reason other than it gives your life shape. It's the same impulse that makes people stack rocks on beaches, fold fitted sheets correctly, or practice piano even if no one's listening. Historians still argue whether Sisyphus is a lesson in despair or defiance, but the longer you're down here, the more you think it's neither. Maybe he's a mirror, reflecting back whatever someone brings into the story. If you expect tragedy, you'll see it. If you expect meaning, you'll find patterns. If you're just tired and can't sleep, you'll find a guy pushing a rock and think, mood. Because repetition isn't just a loop, it's a language. And once you start speaking it, it becomes oddly calming. Today, you try something strange. You slow down. You push less like someone desperate for the top, and more like someone savouring the incline. You feel the rock's weight settle into your bones, not like a burden, but like ballast, something that keeps you grounded. And it's peaceful, in a weird, sweaty, lower back cramping way. You pause just shy of the summit. Let the rock teeter on the edge. Normally it slips too early or not at all, but this time it just sits there, indecisive. You step back, hands on your hips. You nod at it like, your move. And when it finally rolls back, slowly, reluctantly, it almost feels like a favour. Like it gave you those extra seconds just to see what you'd do with them. You watch it go, not with dread, but with a strange warmth. Like spotting an old friend at the end of a long hallway. The boulder settles with a thud that echoes across the underworld. You begin the walk down. At the base, you place your palms against the stone once more. It doesn't greet you, but it's there, reliable, unchanging. Your endlessly indifferent partner in a dance that neither of you chose, but both of you perform now with a kind of fluency. You take a breath, and push, again, and again, and again. You're not alone down here. That was a surprise the first time you realised it. After what felt like centuries of solitary grunt labour, you started noticing flickers, sounds, shadows, other eternities in progress. Tartarus isn't a bustling city. It's not even a sleepy village. It's more like a dark cul-de-sac where everyone's house is locked from the inside, and no one really wants to borrow sugar. Still, you start seeing them, the others, your neighbours in punishment. Tantalus is the easiest to spot. He's nearby, usually knee-deep in a pool that drains whenever he bends to drink, surrounded by fruit that jerks away just when he reaches for it. Every single time. You nod to each other now and then, a professional courtesy. Neither of you speaks much. Honestly, what would you say? Hey, how's your particular brand of unbearable futility going? It feels redundant. Then there's Ixion. You don't see him so much as hear him. The wheel he's strapped to screeches as it spins endlessly through the air like a flaming carnival ride from your worst dreams. Once the wind carried his voice to you, just a faint shrieking why, and then he vanished again behind a pillar of volcanic smoke. Other figures flicker in and out. There's a guy tangled in a tree that grows in reverse, a woman who's always running but never moving, feet worn down to mist, and someone who just stands in the same spot for eons, silently balancing a clay pot that never breaks but never empties either. You all live here. Sort of. Call it the Tartarus Neighbourhood Watch. No one knocks. There are no block parties. But there's a silent understanding, a kind of mutual acknowledgement among the punished. You exist alongside each other, like dim stars in a galaxy of regret. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes you catch Tantalus looking your way when his fruit jerks out of reach for the 1,000th time. You exchange the tiniest shrug as if to say, same man. Same a rock rolls, a fig escapes, a wheel turns. There's something comforting about shared doom. In fact, here's a little historical oddity. The Greeks often used Tartarus not just as a threat, but as a form of dramatic justice. The placement of certain figures near others was intentional, a warning, like putting the cheat next to the glutton, or the betrayer beside the arrogant. Punishments were tailored, but also curated. It wasn't just eternal torment, it was theatre, cosmic commentary. A scholar once noted, half-jokingly, that Tartarus was the first example of targeted suffering algorithms. You didn't just get thrown into the void, you got placed somewhere that made sense to the story, ancient divine logic at work, brutal but narratively consistent. But over time, the why of who's where fades. The origin stories blur. You stop wondering what everyone else did. You assume it was bad, or clever, or unlucky. After a few millennia, the difference becomes academic. The fascinating part is that no one here seems angry anymore. You expected rage, screaming, despair. But mostly, there's just movement, repetition, quiet, a kind of resigned choreography. And here's the real kicker. Sometimes, when you squint through the fog and smoke, you think you see moments. Little pauses in the routine, Tantalus closing his eyes for a second too long, Ixion's wheel slowing just enough to catch a breath, the tree-bound figure whispering to her roots. You start to wonder if everyone down here is making their own peace. Not loudly, not heroically, just in the small spaces between suffering. Historians still argue whether Tartarus was ever meant to be read literally. Some say it was symbolic, an internal space, a metaphor for psychological self-confrontation. Others insist it was a real, terrifying realm below the underworld, carved out to house those who defied divine order. But maybe both can be true. Maybe you're inside a myth and inside your own mind. You glance around the slope. The canyon walls pulse with that same low-heat glow, molten veins running up the rock like angry vines. But you're not afraid of it anymore. It's just scenery. The boulder sits below you again, freshly settled after another downward roll. This time, you take a moment to scan the horizon. Not for escape, not for hope, just for connection. You think you see the faint shape of someone waving, a blur, a shimmer. Could be a trick of the light, or it could be real. You wave back. Why not? The boulder waits, impatient in its silence. You stretch your arms overhead, back cracking like dry bark. You feel the weariness in your limbs, but it's not oppressive. It's satisfying, like you've earned it. You rest your hands on the boulder, and for the first time in a long time, you whisper, not to it, but to the void around you. Still here. No one answers, but maybe they don't need to. Maybe Tantalus is muttering the same thing to his fruit. Maybe Ixion, in one spinning moment of clarity, thinks it too. The eternal punishment continues, but so does something else, a shared truth, a quiet witness, a nod across the canyon. You dig your heels in and push. You're halfway up the slope again, and it's just occurred to you, there's a theme down here, a certain style to the punishments, a vibe. Like whoever designed Tartarus had a specific folder on their divine desktop labelled Creative Consequences, and really leaned into circles, loops, and self-inflicted chaos. It's almost funny. Almost. Take your own situation. You push a rock uphill, it rolls back. Repeat until heat death of the universe. That's wheel-shaped suffering if you squint. You've got Ixion on his literal flaming wheel. Tantalus, caught in a loop of desire and denial. The others are trapped too. Endless ladders, fruitless climbs, impossible balances. It's all cycles. Which makes you wonder, do the gods just love circles? Is that their favourite shape? Or maybe they understand something humans pretend to forget. Most mistakes aren't one-time things. They're spirals. We relive them. We revise them. We return to them. You've come to suspect that Greek punishment wasn't about the event. It was about the pattern. You were clever. Too clever. You thought you could outwit life, cheat death, manipulate gods. But you didn't learn your lesson the first time, or the second. And so you got handed this. An unskippable tutorial in futility. Now here you are, in the middle of eternity's most annoying group project, waiting for your partner, gravity, to mess everything up again. But today you try something bold. You stop mid-push and look behind you. That's right, you look back. Nothing dramatic happens, of course. The underworld doesn't explode. Zeus doesn't send a lightning bolt. Still, it feels like cheating. The boulder trembles slightly, as if offended that you're breaking eye contact. You smirk, then plant your feet again and push. This time, you count backward, from 100. Not because it helps, but because it changes the rhythm. Because change, even if it's superficial, still makes the air feel a little fresher. A mainstream historical truth. The ancient Greeks saw time differently than we do. They didn't have a linear obsession with forward progress. Time was often seen as cyclical. Birth, death, rebirth. Even their calendars looped in festivals, seasons, recurring myths. You weren't going somewhere, you were returning. Tartarus leans hard into that philosophy. The same step, the same push, the same fall. And yet, it's never exactly the same, is it? Every roll has its nuance. Every climb has a moment where your balance shifts differently. One time your shoulder stings, another, your wrist clicks. Once, a gust of wind hit just wrong, and you swore you heard the faintest laughter echoing down the canyon. Even loops evolve. That's the part most myths leave out. Here's a lesser-known scholarly argument. Some say these cyclical punishments weren't just retributions. They were lessons. Not don't do the thing, but see the thing you keep doing. Self-awareness, eternal style, behaviour patterns on a mythological scale. The rock isn't punishing you. It's showing you something. What exactly? Who knows? Could be patience. Could be surrender, could be a very long-winded joke about productivity culture. But you're paying attention now. You recall a dream once, or maybe it was just a particularly dramatic boulder-induced hallucination where you weren't in Tartarus. You were in a modern office, fluorescent lights, beige carpet, Endless reports to file. Every time you finished one, a new stack appeared. The printer jammed. The coffee was burnt. You kept trying to fix things, but the cycle never broke. You woke up relieved to be back with your rock. Let that sink in. Your punishment was better than middle management. That might be the most telling realization of all. You reach the crest again. The boulder wobbles. You know it'll roll. Of course it will. But you hold it steady for an extra breath. The power of almost. Almost to the top. Almost let it stay. Almost meant it. And then, release. It tumbles. You watch it go, arms crossed, face unreadable. There's something elegant about how it falls. Predictable, yes, but not clumsy. Like it knows its role. Like it rehearsed. It crashes at the bottom with its usual thud, the sound echoing like the underworld's sad little drum roll. You start your descent. Again. You glance to the side. Tantalus is still reaching. Ixion's wheel catches a flame. The woman with the running feet slows down for a breath. And you? You're thinking about how this punishment is actually just a weirdly intense workshop on self-reflection. Because you've learned how to pay attention to details. You've mastered the micro. You've memorized slope gradients. You can probably draw the boulder from memory with alarming anatomical precision. You get good at anything if you do it enough. Even futility. You reach the base. Place your hands back on the boulder. It's waiting. Heavy. Familiar. The cycle begins again. And for reasons even you don't understand, you almost look forward to it. At some point, somewhere between your 1,000th and millionth uphill push, you start asking questions that only philosophers would love. Not, how do I escape, or will this ever end? But the one that slips in quietly and sticks, is this a metaphor? And the answer is, probably. Because how else do you explain the elegance of your situation? A task that never ends, a goal you can never reach, a punishment for trying to outthink the very rules of life and death. It all screams symbolism, like a poem written in sweat and scraped knuckles. And wouldn't you know it? Plenty of philosophers agree. Camus. Yes, that Camus. The French one with the trench coat and existential dread. He was weirdly obsessed with you. Wrote about you like you were a tragic hero. Said that your condition was the perfect image of absurdity. And that the true act of rebellion wasn't escape, but acceptance. That's right. He said to imagine you happy. And honestly, that's either the kindest or the most wildly unhinged thing anyone's ever said about you. Camus argued that since the universe is indifferent and suffering inevitable, we become free the moment we stop demanding meaning. When we choose to go on anyway, knowing that nothing is guaranteed, that's when we win. Even if the rock still rolls back. Wild, right? You've come to appreciate the elegance of his logic. Because he wasn't saying you liked the punishment. He was saying you reclaimed it. That you became bigger than it, simply by accepting that you'd never beat it, and then choosing to push anyway. Powerful stuff for a guy who spends eternity sweaty and alone. But it's not just Camus. Other thinkers have used your story as a canvas, a mirror. Some paint it as despair, like a person trapped in depression, going through the motions, waiting for change that never comes. Others see you as every worker, caught in the 9-to-5 grind, dreaming of weekends that slide away as fast as they arrive. There's even a fringe theory from a modern literary scholar who suggested that you might have eventually grown to love the rock. Not just tolerate it, but genuinely love it. That in some secret moment between roles, you named it not just out of habit, but out of affection. Is that true? You're not telling. But if you had named it, let's say Boldy, you'd never admit it publicly. Another scholar suggested the myth wasn't a warning about rebellion at all, but a parable about consciousness. That you weren't punished for being too clever. You were punished for being aware, for seeing the cracks in the system and refusing to play dumb. And your reward? Eternal insight. The catch, of course, is that it comes with the world's worst gym membership. Historians still debate whether Sisyphus was ever meant to be sympathetic. In early texts, he's more villain than victim, a manipulator, a cheat, someone who tested boundaries no mortal should. But by the time the philosophers got to him, he'd evolved into something else entirely, a symbol of what it means to be human in a world that often doesn't care. Because the truth is, most people are pushing something. A career, a dream, a relationship, a version of themselves they hope to reach someday. And a lot of those things roll back down, over and over, just like the boulder, and yet they get up, they keep pushing. That's what you've come to understand about your myth. It's not a punishment, it's a reflection. Sure, the setting's a bit dramatic, and okay, the gods definitely handed it down with a cruel smile, but they accidentally made you timeless, a mirror that never breaks, a quiet echo of every soul that's ever whispered, "Again? I just did this." But you're not bitter. That's another transformation you didn't expect. You've stopped seeing the boulder as the enemy, not because it changed, because you did. Somewhere between the 1,000th fall and the 1,000,000th climb, your resistance softened. The fight drained away, not into surrender, but into something quieter. Call it understanding. You start pushing not to win, but because that's what you do now. Not out of pride or hope or fear, just because. It's oddly freeing, like you've stepped outside the script and are now improvising. Not the story they gave you, the story you're shaping one roll at a time. You reach the top again. For a moment, just a moment, the boulder balances, wobbles. You feel a flicker of absurd hope. Maybe this time. Nope, it rolls. You smile, not sadly, not mockingly, just knowingly. And then you follow, because in that moment, you're not failing. You're becoming. Every once in a while, if you could still measure time in whiles, you get the feeling someone's watching. Not in the creepy ghost behind the curtain way, but more like the subtle shift of attention. A divine eyebrow twitching. A sudden hush between boulder pushes. It's the gods. You can't prove it. They don't show up. They don't leave notes. But there's a shift in the air, like Olympus itself leaned forward in its chair to peek over the underworld railing and see how their favourite rebel is doing. They're bored. That's your theory. Because even gods, with all their thunderbolts and shape-shifting shenanigans, have slow days. And when they do, they check in on their long-term projects. You, Tantalus, Ixion, eternal punishments double as eternal entertainment. It's grim, but it tracks. Sometimes when you're mid-push, you feel it. A prickle on your neck. And for just a second, you straighten your spine, flex your shoulders. Not for vanity, just for spite. Let them see your form has improved. Let them whisper, "Sisyphus has glutes now." You'd like to think this bothers them. Because when they sentenced you, they expected brokenness, despair, the tragic collapse of a once proud man. Instead, they got you. Grizzled, sunless, and still rolling. You imagine the conversations up there. Should we, intervene? Nah, he seems weirdly fine. Is he humming? Is that a tune? It's a satisfying fantasy. Historically, the Greek gods were notoriously inconsistent. Zeus could reward one liar and punish another. Athena might bless someone for cleverness, then curse the next person for the same quality. Olympus wasn't justice. It was reality TV with a divine budget. So, the idea that they might be watching now, mid-eternity, isn't far-fetched. They're probably sipping ambrosia, scrolling through mortal drama and occasionally checking the Tartarus channel for updates. Still, they don't interfere. That might be the cruelest part, or the most liberating. Because if no one intervenes, then what you do here belongs to you. You think back to when Hermes dragged you here. He was brisk, businesslike, annoyingly smug. You tried bargaining, of course. You always did. But he just shrugged and said something like, "Orders are orders," then vanished in a puff of winged indifference. You never saw a god again. But now, with the hill before you and the boulder behind you, you sense them watching. Quietly. Curiously. Maybe even confused. Because you were supposed to suffer. And you did. For a long time. But now you've made it yours. There's a theory in psychology, modern, mortal stuff, that says people can adjust to almost anything. It's called hedonic adaptation. Win the lottery, lose a leg, move to a cave, you'll eventually get used to it. Your happiness resets to baseline. And what is your eternity, if not the ultimate test case? You've adapted. Fully. You even have rituals now. That little knee bounce before the final push. The rock tap. Just a light knock-knock with your knuckles before you start. Like saying hello. Like showing respect. Fringe idea from a Greek fringe philosopher. Antisthenes, a student of Socrates, once suggested that freedom is found in needing nothing. In accepting what is, without wanting it to be anything else. You hated that when you were alive. But now, you wonder if he was onto something. because the less you want from the boulder, the lighter it feels. The less you fight the hill, the less steep it seems. You're not free in the usual sense. There's no door, no exit, but you're freer than you were when you were raging. That's the part the gods probably don't get. You push, not because you have to, but because in some impossible, paradoxical twist, you've learned to prefer it. This hill, it's predictable. The world of the living wasn't. There, you had betrayal, ambition, envy, the randomness of storms and kings and prophecies. Here, you have the boulder, and the boulder never lies. That might be worth more than freedom. Historians still argue whether this myth is a tragedy or a lesson in resilience. Some say the gods won by trapping you here. Others say you won by refusing to crumble. A few say it doesn't matter. What matters is that the story keeps going, because that's what stories do. They loop, they roll, they change with each retelling, just like you. You reach the top again. The boulder balances, too long this time. For a breath you wonder, is it staying? And then, like always, it tips, rolls. Down it goes. You don't sigh, you don't groan. You just turn and walk. You imagine the gods watching. Maybe they whisper, maybe they scoff, or maybe, just maybe, they nod. Because even Olympus, with all its power, can't take this from you. Your choice to continue. And that's something they'll never understand. You knew it would roll back. You always know. But something about the way the boulder moves this time, smooth, deliberate, almost lazy, makes you pause longer than usual. You watch it go, not with frustration, not even with amusement, but with something bordering on appreciation. Because quietly, something's shifted. You're not sure when it happened. Maybe between the 1,000th roll and the 10,000th climb. Maybe during one of those lunch breaks where you stared into the void and imagined what clouds might look like if Tartarus had a sky. But the shift is undeniable. You've stopped seeing the rollback as failure. In fact, you kind of like it. Not in a flag-waving, I love my eternal punishment kind of way, but there's something refreshing, relieving even, about the moment the boulder breaks free and rolls itself back to the bottom. It means you get to start over, and you love a good reset. The top of the hill used to taunt you. It was a lie, a fake-out, like the gods dangling hope just far enough to be cruel, but now, the top is just another beat in the rhythm. You don't race toward it anymore, you don't beg it to stay, you reach it, feel that faint wobble as the boulder hesitates, and then, when it rolls, you don't flinch, you breathe, you stretch, and you walk. There's a strange dignity in it, in letting go before the fall, in expecting the rollback. You're no longer the victim of a cruel loop, you're the expert of it. A quiet masterclass in futility. Here's a historical detail that might interest you. In some early versions of your myth, the boulder wasn't just a punishment. It was a symbol, a stand-in for ambition, or ego, or the weight of responsibility. The thing that rulers, like you once were, carry with pride until it crushes them. And what if it was ambition? What if you were never meant to escape it, but to learn to carry it better? That idea doesn't bother you anymore. In fact, it makes sense. Mortals worship success, but they never ask what happens after. After the power, after the throne, after the cleverness runs dry. You were a king who became a lesson. But maybe you're still a king, of something different now. The boulder waits for you at the base again. You reach it, and this time you rest your hand on it before you push, not out of obligation. Just because it feels like the right thing to do. You don't speak to it. You don't need to. You push. And here's the part no one outside this hill understands. The climb has its own kind of grace. Sure, it's sweaty and repetitive and probably terrible for your knees, but there's rhythm, flow, movement. You feel yourself in it. Your muscles, your breath. The grounded weight of being alive, even in the underworld. And when the top approaches again, when the boulder does its usual fake-out, you don't brace for failure, you prepare for freedom. Because when it rolls back, that's your break, your walk, your moment to think, to stretch, to take in the eternal volcanic ambience that you've weirdly come to accept. Repetition isn't prison, it's pace. The Buddhists, way after your time, figured this out too. They talked about samsara, the endless cycle of birth and death. They didn't fear it. They observed it, found stillness within it. You didn't have scrolls or sutras, just a hill and a rock. But somehow, you arrived at the same place. It's hard to describe what it feels like to finally stop wishing for the rock to stay, to stop clenching at the top, hoping this time it'll hold. When you let go of that hope, you don't feel despair. You feel space. Space to reflect, space to breathe, space to laugh sometimes, quietly, under your breath, like a tired coach watching his favourite underdog miss the goal again, but with flair. Historians still argue whether the gods cursed you or blessed you, whether your punishment was unique or just the most poetic, but none of them have rolled your boulder, none of them have felt that subtle shift when the stone gives way and starts its descent, that brief freedom you get in return, because every rollback is a pause, a falling away of expectations, a reminder that even in a trap you can carve out something that feels like choice. You get to the bottom again, you roll your neck, your hands find the grooves in the rock without looking. The boulder, for all its weight, isn't heavy with shame anymore, it's just the boulder, and the hill. You know every ridge now, every dip. You could walk it in your sleep if Tartarus allowed sleep, which it doesn't, because that would be too generous. Still, your steps have purpose. They aren't frantic. They aren't desperate. They're practiced. And if someone were to watch you now, say a bored god leaning on a divine railing, they wouldn't see punishment. They'd see someone who knows, someone who doesn't beg the stone to behave, someone who has stopped needing the top to mean anything at all. That might be the deepest rebellion of all. Not escape, not revenge, just peace. You press your shoulder to the boulder, and once again, you push. You wouldn't think naming a rock would make a difference, but it does. You start small, just a nickname whispered under your breath between pushes. At first, it's a joke. Something dumb like Pebbles or Sir Rolsalot. You laugh to yourself the way only someone who hasn't seen a mirror in centuries can. Quietly, self-aware, and a little unhinged. But eventually the name sticks. Not because the rock has a personality, it doesn't. It's still granite and grudge, indifferent as ever. But you have changed, and naming something gives it shape. It transforms it from the object of your suffering into something manageable. You settle on marble, not because it's marble, it isn't, but because the irony amuses you. You imagine explaining the joke to someone and them not laughing, which makes you laugh harder. Marble becomes more than a name, it becomes a relationship. You start to decorate it, not in any dramatic craft store way. You etch small lines into its surface, tiny notches with a sharpened shard of underworld flint. At first you try to count the days. That gets old quickly. Time doesn't flow here. It puddles. Instead you make patterns, swirls, spirals, little doodles that catch the underworld light in interesting ways. It becomes your journal, your mural, your art. You start whispering to marble, not always, just when the quiet gets too thick. You complain, you confess, you narrate the role with dramatic flair. And now, dear boulder, we enter the final ascent of today's climb. Hold on to your ridges, it's going to be a bumpy one. It's absurd, and that's the point, because absurdity is soothing. Here's a quirky historical tidbit for you. The philosopher Diogenes, yes, the guy who lived in a barrel, used to talk to statues. He claimed it helped him practice rejection. He'd beg alms from marble figures to remind himself that silence wasn't failure. It was freedom. You feel that deep in your eternal quads. You and marble may not have long chats, but the presence is comforting, predictable. There's no judgment in rock, just resistance. The kind you can lean on. You start singing. Not well, there are no talent scouts in Tartarus, but with gusto. Old sea shanties, nonsense jingles, a completely improvised anthem called Roll Baby Roll that would probably earn you a cult following in some weirdo corner of the living world. It keeps you sane, or at least your version of sane, because repetition once feared is now your studio, your cathedral, your sandbox, and within it you find little ways to express yourself. Today you use your fingertip to trace a face on marble's side, 2 eyes, a lopsided mouth. You call it Marlene. You ask marble how Marlene's feeling. Marble doesn't answer. Of course marble never answers, but the point isn't communication, the point is connection. Humans have always done this. Named the inanimate, given personality to the impersonal. Sailors carved names into ships. Prisoners scratched calendars into cell walls. Lonely shepherds sang to their herding sticks. You're not mad, you're human. And the more you add to marble, scars, lines, nicknames, the less it feels like a punishment. More like a partner. Not in a cutesy rom-com in Tartarus way, but in the sense that you've accepted it, maybe even respect it. That's the strange feeling, to respect your burden. Historians still debate whether that's what your myth was meant to teach. Some say it was just a cosmic slap on the wrist. Others think it's a deep meditation on how humans relate to effort. That maybe the gods weren't punishing you. Maybe they were showing you what happens when we attach too much meaning to outcomes. You were always obsessed with results, outsmarting, winning. Now, you live in the process. There is no win, just the climb. And marble? Marble's your constant. You know every curve, every scrape. You recognize the exact vibration it makes when it slips too early versus when it holds for half a second longer. You could describe the way its weight shifts on your shoulder in poetic verse if you cared to. You don't. Yet. And today, after a particularly graceful roll, you find yourself patting its side. Genuinely. Nice tumble. You grin. Not because you're delusional, but because acknowledging small victories matters. A stable shove, a smoother climb, a wobble caught just in time. These are your wins now. You don't get parades, you don't get applause, but you've learned to cheer for yourself. That's the real lesson the gods didn't see coming. They gave you monotony, thinking it would hollow you out, but you filled it. With article, with songs, with nicknames and notches and moments of silly joy. You've turned eternal labour into something almost beautiful. Not because you had to, but because you could. You press your palms to marble. It's warm from the climb, dusty familiar. You take a deep breath, and once again, you push. Today, the hill feels different. Not steeper, not longer, just quieter. You notice it halfway through the climb, somewhere around the jagged ridge you privately call Ankle Snapper Peak. The usual whispers of heat, the low groan of the canyon's breath, they're all there. But there's a stillness layered underneath, like something's missing, or watching. You glance over your shoulder. Nothing. Marble's right where you left it, pressed against your spine like a burdensome, boulder-shaped backpack. But the silence behind your breath feels staged. That's when you see it. A path. Just past the ledge you never reach, a slit in the stone that's never been there before. Narrow, sloping upward. It looks like an exit. You freeze. You stare. Then, because of course you do, you keep pushing. One more shove, and marble reaches the summit. You let it rest there, balanced, not rolling, not yet. It holds, as if waiting for your decision. You turn toward the slit. The way out. It's clearly a trap. You know this. The gods don't do forgiveness. They do tests. Historically, escape was always a trick. Orpheus looked back. Eurydice disappeared. Prometheus got unchained, then chained again. Even Heracles had to bargain, bleed and beg for every inch of freedom. So the sudden presence of a door where there wasn't one. Sisyphus doesn't even begin to cover it. Still, your feet move. You approach. The path curves upward, glowing faintly, no screaming, no chains, no snakes, which honestly just makes it worse. If they wanted to scare you off, they'd make it obvious. This is subtle, tempting, an offer that whispers, you've done enough. Maybe you have. You step into the passage. Marble stays behind, waiting. The silence is deafening. Inside, the walls glow with a light you forgot existed. Not harsh, not divine, just gentle. The path winds upward. For the first time in countless years, you feel air that moves. Not wind, but possibility. Your chest tightens. You walk until you reach a chamber. Empty. A ledge above the hill. You can see it now. Your hill. Your boulder. Your routine. From a distance. There's a seat. Not a throne. Not a trapdoor. Just a flat stone. You sit. Nothing happens. You wait. Still nothing. After a while, an hour, a year, it doesn't matter, you get up. You look down at marble, it hasn't moved. It's waiting. And suddenly, that's the real question. Why hasn't it rolled? Because it only rolls when you let go. That's when it clicks. This path wasn't a reward. It was a pause. A test. Yes. But not of your strength. Of your choice. Do you stay here, watching the hill from above? Detached, free of sweat, free of climb? Or do you go back? It would be easy to stay, to let go, to turn marble into a memory. But that's not who you are anymore. You realize something. The climb, the weight, the struggle. They're not your punishment. They're your practice. You don't want to escape the hill. You want to return to it. Not because you love suffering, but because the rhythm matters, the routine, the push, the rollback. You miss the song you hum when you hit the midpoint. You miss tracing Marlene's chalky eyes on Marble's side. You miss the stretch of your calves as you brace for the final shove. Freedom is fine, but the climb, that's you. So you smile. You walk back down the path, past the glow, past the tempting air. You reach the summit. Marble is there, balanced, still waiting. You run your hand across its scarred, scribbled surface. Let's go. And you push. Not because you're trapped, because you choose to. Historians still argue what this part of the myth means, if it ever existed at all. Some say Sisyphus rejected freedom out of fear. Others think he was given a chance and passed it up because he'd grown too comfortable in pain. But maybe the truth is quieter. Maybe the door wasn't an escape. Maybe it was a mirror, to see what you'd do if you could walk away. And you did. You walked back. Because this isn't punishment anymore. It's a practice, a posture, a dance, a rock, a slope, a man. And that, you think, is enough. Marble rolls. You follow, smiling. Somewhere along the climb you stop thinking about where you are. Not in a dramatic, I transcend the underworld way. More like the way a musician forgets the notes and just plays, or a swimmer forgets the water and just moves. You're not measuring the slope anymore. You're not wondering what it all means. You're just here. Your feet find the rhythm. Your palms find their grip. The hill rises before you, just like it always does, and Marble rolls with a kind of patient weight that feels less like defiance and more like a familiar greeting. There's no surprise anymore, and weirdly that's comforting. Because repetition has become your language. You know every nuance now, the exact moment when Marble starts to lean, the soft rumble of the stone before it shifts, the gentle strain in your back that tells you the summit is near, and with every climb, every push, you feel something that would have been unthinkable before. Pride, not in winning, there is no win, but in showing up, in doing the thing again, in pushing your whole being into something completely pointless, and doing it well. You haven't just accepted the boulder, you've mastered it. There's a word you once heard, before all this, arete. It's Greek, of course. Like everything else down here, it means virtue, but not in the boring moralistic sense. It means excellence, living up to your fullest potential. Being the best version of you, no matter what task you're given. Even if that task is completely absurd. Maybe especially if that task is completely absurd. You think about this as you brace for another shove. Your muscles tighten, but not in protest. They're ready. They know this dance. You wonder if anyone else up there ever understood it. Zeus, Hermes, Hades. Did they think you'd break? Did they think you'd resist until you crumbled? Joke's on them. You've outgrown resistance. You're not here to rebel anymore. You're here to roll. Today, you hit the summit again. You rest your hand on Marble's rough flank, fingers tracing one of the old etchings, a loop within a loop, a spiral you once carved just to pass the time. You smile at it, then step back. The boulder waits. You wait with it. For a moment the silence feels holy. Then it tilts, rolls, and the sound of it tumbling, once a cruel thunder, is now just the turning of a page. You begin the walk down. It's slower this time, not because you're tired, but because you're present. Each footstep presses into the slope with intention. You're not racing, you're arriving. At the bottom, Marble rests exactly where you expected. Loyal, patient, heavy. You crouch beside it. Press your forehead to its side. Whisper something only it can hear. There is no finish line, no grand revelation, just this task, and that's what makes it beautiful. You don't need meaning. You've built peace. Historians still argue what Sisyphus means. Rebellion, punishment, persistence. Let them argue. You're not a myth anymore. You're a movement. You take a deep breath, place your hands, and push. And now the hill fades, the stone settles, and you, tired but whole, feel your thoughts soften like mist rolling over marble. Let the details blur, the weight of the boulder, the slope beneath your feet, the hush of the underworld all around you. Let them quiet. There is no need to remember how many climbs you've made, or what came first, or what comes next. Only the rhythm matters now, that soft, slow repetition, the gentle push, the return, the beginning that never ends. You feel your breath even out, in and out. Your arms fall loose, your mind unwinds like the slope itself was never steep, just long, just quiet, just here. You don't have to push anymore, not tonight. Tonight, you can let the boulder rest where it lies, let the gods grow bored of watching, let Tartarus whisper itself into silence, let the rock wait, let you wait. Because even in stories that loop forever, there is rest between the rolls, stillness in the space before motion begins again, and maybe, just maybe in this pause you've found something more lasting than escape. You've found yourself. Now, close your eyes, let the slope flatten, let the stone vanish, and let sleep roll gently toward you. Sweet dreams.